Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all to this talk on marriage, on building a family, actually. We plan to try and go to the many different aspects that are connected to building a family, talking about the marriage itself, which is the foundation of the family, the relationship between the husband and the wife. And we also intend to touch on polygamy, so relationship between husband and wives. We also hope to be able to talk about building that family, what kind of attitudes and expectations and activities help to make a family strong. We also hope, inshallah, to be able to talk about, before getting married, spouse selection. And we also want to touch on some of those other tough topics, divorce, death of a spouse, and also what some people call failure to launch, someone who has been hoping to get married, but the years pass and it's still not happening. It's a very, very broad topic that we've been given. It's a big task. And as of a few days ago, I was very relaxed, very comfortable, because I said I'll be making the presentation with this gentleman here. Then he conveniently came down with cough and sore throat. If he speaks now, you will think he's Darth Vader. If you've watched Star Wars, very raspy voice, not nice at all. So as of last night, I was still very hopeful. Take your medicine, you'll do most of the talking, I'll come as backup. By this morning, after listening to him cough throughout the night, I realized, okay, I can't escape this one. So as he very lightly put it a short while ago, that I would be the main text, he would be the footnote. And if you must have listened to him speak, you would know that that's the easiest way to terrify me, to say I'll be the main text and he'll be the footnote. So when he chose to sit here, just very close, where I can quickly whisper and say, what was that again? I became very, very comfortable. However, as we always try to point out, when someone is given the microphone and the person is said, give a talk, the person is not necessarily the expert in the room. The person just happens to be the person with the microphone. That's it. And the person who has been given notice to try and prepare and talk about this. So during the course of the talk, we'll be touching on things that you already know, you've heard before, you've read before, you've even talked about yourselves before. However, the essence of a session like this, a sharing session, is to just see it maybe from a different perspective, to add more to that which we already know. And quite often the person who has the microphone ends up learning some new things as well along the way. Because as a lecturer of ours once put it, that he doesn't just come in front of the class and lecture, he reads. And what forced him to make this confession was when he fixed the lecture, and for some reason there was something going on in the school, the class had to be postponed, so it was postponed from one day to the other. We, the students, were very happy, any excuse for a holiday. The second time the lecture was meant to hold, something happened again, and he had to postpone it again. And he didn't look happy, but the students were happy. So on the third occasion, there was some problem. I can't remember what it was that kept happening. And then immediately some students said, let's postpone the class. He said, no, I'm not postponing. First day I read, before I came to class, the class didn't hold. Second day I read, the class didn't hold. He said, I've finished reading and this class must hold today. So when you hold a microphone, you've just been prepared, but you don't know everything. In this case, I don't know everything. Now, talking about building a family. As I said, there are just so many angles to this, so we'll try and go from one angle, cover that, and take it from another angle. We want to start with the idea of the purpose of life itself, because marriage is a part of life. It's an essential part of any society. one cannot talk about building a family without talking about life itself. It's like taking something out of its context. It loses greater meaning to just launch into the idea of family. Because as Muslims, everything we do is done against this big canvas, a big backdrop. So when we talk about the purpose of life, for many of us, our conviction about why do we exist, why are we here, comes from the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was talking to the angels and said he's going to create, to place on earth, a vicegerent. So we start with the purpose of life. And we start with the concept of vicegerency. Khilafah will be placed on earth. And the angels were wondering, they were puzzled. Why would Allah do this? Why would he create us? And they asked him, why would he put someone on earth who's just going to cause mischief when they are there praising him? Like, isn't that sufficient? And the response Allah gave them was to refer to his perfect knowledge. He knows best why he does these things. But people, many of us, many thinkers, scholars, look at the use of the word khilafah, and it gives us pause. It makes us slow down and try and understand from that angle, why do we even exist? When I was discussing this verse with some 13-year-old students, I think they were about 13, the average age in the class was 13 at the time. And I had, as usual, prepared my class. I knew what I wanted to tell them. I knew the answers. You have to represent Allah. That's what being a vicegerent is representing a ruler or somebody else. You have to represent him. And when I was done, I asked the usual question, do you have any questions? And then a student said, he had a question. And I said, what's your question? And he said, he doesn't think we can represent Allah. So it wasn't really a question, it was a challenge to all I had spent about 20 minutes trying to pitch perfectly. And when he said he doesn't think you can represent Allah, I wanted to immediately tell him, but you can. But I thought instead, wait, let's talk about this. So I said, how many of you feel the way he feels, that you can't represent Allah? And I saw hands begin to go up slowly. So I had been talking for about 20 minutes to a number of students, and a number of them did not agree with what I was saying. So I said, why do you think you can't? And someone said, well, Allah is just so... He's so great, subhanallah, how can you try to represent him? And I then asked, those of you who didn't raise your hands, you feel you can represent Allah? And they said, yes. And I asked, how? And one boy said, well, you think about Allah's attributes, and you try and reflect those attributes. He said, then you are presenting him. I said, give me examples. Because we also know, even among the scholars, they say it's not all of Allah's attributes that human beings can accommodate. So I needed to know, did this student understand that? I said, what kind of attributes? He said, well, Allah is kind, so you should be kind. Allah is generous, you should be generous. Allah is compassionate, you should try and act with compassion. So he got it. And right there and then, he gave me the perfect answer. So the next time I had the class, I made sure this time, after I told them about the verse and vicegerency and the thinking behind it, I said, how many of you think you cannot represent Allah? And I had the same response. Some said they couldn't, and we went through the whole discussion again. So I offer you the insight of a 13-year-old boy to say, when we start talking about the purpose of life, why are we here? One way of looking at it is we are here to reflect all that Allah is to the extent of our human abilities. And we won't dwell on those things. It goes with, we know what they are: kindness, compassion, honesty, being like a source of peace or tranquility for others, looking for growth in others, helping others to grow and to develop, giving support, being strong when you should be strong, and so on and so forth. So when we say purpose of life, it's that striving for the betterment of humanity, or all creation, in fact. We see this concept being expressed in some of the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many times you would find, if you hear a hadith that starts with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was reported to have said, if you believe in Allah and the last day, more often than not, what he's going to ask us to do has to do with being good to others, doing something for someone else. If you believe in Allah and let the one, or if you believe, or let he who believes in Allah on the last day say what is good or keep silent. Be kind to his neighbor. What are the others? There was the one about you are not a believer until love for others what you love for yourself. There's the one about people being safe from your tongue and your hands. The entire humanity being safe from your tongue and your hands. But the words with which he precedes that last statement is always tied to this concept of belief in Allah, or belief in the Day of Judgment, or belief in both. So that for a Muslim, your belief or the test of your faith is tied closely to how you treat others. When we say we are Muslims, when we take the Shahada, it then becomes necessary for us to live by these values, these principles, to uphold them, to constantly try and reflect them. This is not being perfect, because we can't have perfection. But it is being our best selves, best human selves. Each person trying to be his or her best human self every day in our interaction with people. And it's usually in accomplishing this that we start to feel that our lives have meaning. That's when we start to get that feeling that our lives have meaning, our lives have worth. This, therefore, leads us to marriage, because marriage is an aspect of life. And we cannot talk about the purpose of life, striving for the betterment of creation. Sorry, I put creativity there. For the betterment of creation. We can talk about belief being expressed in how we treat others as separate from the whole idea of family. If we are going to be our best human self with the human beings with whom we interact every day, we can't shut out our families. Actually, our families should be the first recipients of every goodness that comes out of us. Because when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about doing things for oneself and charity, he said you start by being charitable to yourself, then to your family, then to those closest to you. So if you work on trying to be your best self, then the first person who should enjoy the benefits of your being a vicegerent, of your representing Allah through your actions, should be members of your family. Want to add anything?
I think part of the reason why a purpose in life is so important is also because sometimes marriage doesn't go well. And to recognize marriage is a means, not an end. It's a means that can help you fulfill your purpose. It's a means that can help you become more fulfilled. It's a means to make you a better person. It's a means for a greater spiritual legacy, and we'll look more at that. But to ensure that the principles that guide you as an individual are eternal principles that are larger than family. That the end of family is not the end of life. It's not the end of you. Yeah. If that something happens, you've got the strength to go on. Why? Because this is just one department that shut down temporarily. that needs some re-engineering, but there's something else you can lean on. Otherwise, if you live your life work-centered, family-centered, growth-centered, etc., you can get disappointment in any department. But you live your life Allah-centered, centered on principles, centered on values, and everything else fits into that. You become more stable. Otherwise, what you find in some families, and I've seen this with some friends, is when the husband says he's going to divorce, or the wife says she wants a divorce, it's like the whole of life has ended. Suicide is on the table as an option. Burn the house, destroy, so the need to really appreciate there's a purpose in life, and as important as marriage and family is, they can all die in one accident. Anything can happen. It's not the end of life. Life is bigger than just family. So while it is important, we're not belittling it. It is the priority institution that Islam considers you responsible for. You can build other organizations and NGOs and whatever, but this is your first Islamic organization. So while it's important, it's not life. It's just a part of it.
Thank you. That now takes us straight into the heart of the matter, the purpose of marriage itself. There's this verse that many people love, and it's always quoted once people are talking about marriage. And at every sermon that precedes a nikah ceremony, if anyone is going to say something from the Quran, they would pick the verse from Surah Al-Rum, where Allah talks about creating spouses or partners or mates for us. Now, if one looks at that verse, again, just picking the key words, and tries to get a sense of what marriage is meant to be. Again, with this understanding that marriage is just a means to an end, to a bigger purpose. It's a vehicle. But how should things be conducted within the vehicle? When you get on a plane, you are told what to do, what not to do. If there's a problem, this is what you'll hear, this is what you'll see, and this is what you should do. Some people take great care to listen to those guidelines. How do you handle the gas mask when it drops? What do you do with your head, and how do you place your body? Some people look at that, and once they start, the people start making dua, and they say, inshallah, it's not going to happen, so they don't pay close attention. Some say, I've heard it all before, I fly every day. Some people pay close attention. But just as you have people who try to tell you, now this is what you need to do in an airplane, similarly in marriage, if we see marriage as a vehicle, then there are things we need to first start to understand from the get-go. When that understanding is there, it becomes easier to handle some of the challenges that come with marriage, that are part and parcel of the marriage. And we'll talk about some of those challenges, those big things that strain a marriage. We always encounter them. We would usually say, in fact, if your marriage doesn't encounter any strain, there's a problem. That marriage isn't alive. You know how when a baby is born, the baby is expected to scream and yell and shout and punch the air and kick the air. And when that is happening, the doctors and the nurses and the midwives and the parents are happy. The baby is screaming and they are happy. If the baby is born and the baby is silent, then people are afraid something is wrong. A marriage is like a baby in that sense. If a marriage is quiet, something is wrong. If a marriage isn't quiet, all is good. You just need to know how to manage it. Now, we'll talk about that aspect as well, the bumps and the conflict and so on in marriage, inshallah. Now about marriage, starting from, once again, our beginning. Allah mentions in Surah Al-Rum that He is the one that created mates. That's actually the best literal interpretation, mates. We take that word mate. Another interpretation usually given to the word is partners. One of a pair or a partner. And we can use our own understanding of language and say what other words are similar to these. And so we come up with companion and friend. So this is the first understanding that helps us in our marriages. That your husband or your wife is a companion, is a friend, is a partner. Partnership has that thing of equality. But equality, not sameness. And inshallah, we'll touch on the gender differences, personality differences, and so on. So we need to separate this idea of equality from sameness. So we are equal. In the sight of Allah, husbands and wives are equal. The only thing that elevates one above the other is the same thing that elevates one human being above the other in the sight of Allah, taqwa. And who is the best judge of that? It's Allah. So when we start out with this understanding, it therefore means we would usually strive to look at and to find commonalities with our spouses. We'll look for things we share, shared goals, especially shared values. So there's always that idea of sharing values, goals. But we don't always share everything. We don't always share the same interests or the same hobbies. And this takes us back to that idea of, must we be the same? It's sad sometimes to see in a marriage one spouse trying to modify the other spouse so that they become the same, trying to upgrade so that you are more like me, or we have to agree on everything or agree on certain things. Now the interesting thing is disagreements in marriage come from the very beginning or sometimes even before marriage. And what marriage experts have found out is that even in very strong, very solid marriages, these disagreements don't disappear. 5 years later, people are still arguing and quarreling over practically the same things. 10 years down the road, they are still quarreling about the same things. 15, 20, 25. They said 25 years into marriage, people are still arguing about 75% of the same things they were arguing about when the marriage just began. So if anybody has the idea that because we are now mates, we are now partners, we are now companions for life, inshallah, my spouse has to agree with everything I agree with, that person is setting himself or herself up for failure and disappointment. Because it's not going to happen. Your spouse will never become you. You will grow together in certain ways, and the important ways is with regards to your values and some of your goals, but in many other ways you have to let your spouse be your spouse. You have to let them be as they are. I know sometimes we have our own differences, and after we learned about the research from marriage experts, we've agreed on some things that we hope we'll still be quarreling about in the next 25 years. Inshallah. So each time we raise those issues, we know we are just raising them because we want to raise them. We know these things aren't likely to change much. But there's that sense. Now, in trying to make a marriage, build a family, one strong foundation is in building a friendship. From discussions with people who've been married for 30-something years, 40-something years, 50-something years, they keep talking about this essence of marriage being friendship. And so we ask, what do you do with friends? You chat with friends. When you have a problem, you are more likely to talk to a friend than to a non-friend. You hang out with friends. You sit down and you plan, what are you going to do with your friends? Just yesterday, I was discussing with a friend who said her father, who's about 70 or so, not long ago, went on a bike trip with 4 of his friends from Malaysia to China and back. That's what friends do. Friends do crazy things together. Friends allow themselves to be influenced by one another. They open themselves to influence. You don't put your guard up when you are with friends. You don't defend yourself when you are with friends. You don't go into defense mode when you are with friends. It's all happy mode. It's open mode. So if a marriage is to have this essence of companionship or friendship, then we have to have the same disposition towards our spouses, that we allow them to influence us in positive ways, that we sit down and we actually plot and plan, what should we do together, what would be great, what would be fun, what would make my husband or my wife smile, where can we go? And sometimes when people start talking it like this, we picture something grand, some grand gesture. No, with friends, there's no grand gesture. With a friend, you say, let's go out for coffee. With a friend, you say, let's go out for coffee. Let's meet for coffee during break time. And you just call up, let's meet for coffee during break time. Your friend says, yes, sure, why not, or after work. And you go together, you have coffee, you laugh. Sometimes you don't even have much to say. You just sit and you watch people go by, and when you are done with your coffee, then you go home. However, when it comes to our spouses, we sometimes tend to be more technical about the matter. It would have been nice for us to go out for coffee, but we always have a but. But the children, but. With a spouse, if we want to have that flavor of friendship in it, then you don't need some grand gesture. Something as simple as taking a walk around the neighborhood. Something as simple as that. I want to go for a walk around the neighborhood. Let me ask my wife to come along. And usually, it's the women, who tend to have more buts why something can't be done. I might be wrong, but usually it's the women. Yes, the children, the shopping, the laundry. So for a marriage to have this flavor, sometimes we women have to try and drop some of our mothering, caring for the house rule. At times you actually just shut your eyes to the dirt, to the trash, and just go out and have fun. Sometimes you just do it. I remember once one morning, we woke up, Nura and I, and we went for a walk around the compound. And I could think at that moment, even as I was getting ready to go for that walk, of all the other things I could be doing that would probably be more productive to me. I could think also of how I would need to bathe and dress up so I look proper. I don't look so raggedy when I'm outside and the neighbors see me looking raggedy. But that morning I decided to just drop it all, just go for a walk in the morning, wearing your pajama trousers that don't go with the pajama top, that don't go with the tudung, nothing matches. But that's what friends do. Friends don't get all dressed up and proper. Sometimes it's friends who know that under that tudung there's a pin holding things in place. It's friends who know that just a few minutes ago when you were playing football, you went to make this move and your trousers ripped. Friends know. Strangers don't know. So usually with friends, we are less technical, less trying to put it all perfectly, and sometimes in marriage, that's what we want, that flavor to come in from time to time. Caveat, please, or what do they call it, disclaimer. I'm not saying when you are married you should be raggedy. Or you shouldn't care. The point I'm making is sometimes in order to really be friends with one's spouse, one should just let some concerns drop. So that's first. Allah says He has created mates for us from among ourselves, meaning from among this sea of humanity. We'll usually find someone we want to commit to, we want to try and build a family with. It doesn't always happen when we plan or when we want or how we want or with who we want, but we'll come to that later, inshallah. So that we may live with them, we may find tranquility in them. Find tranquility. Tranquility is a big word. Say peace. This is another thing that is essential to marriage. That there should be a sense of peace within the marriage. This is the ideal. All things being equal, this is what we should have. But just because Allah has said that we may find peace with our spouses, doesn't mean the peace is automatic. It's not some angel who comes and says, now you are married, and the angel then brings peace from Allah and waves his wings, and suddenly we have peace. We work for that peace. We sometimes quarrel to attain the peace. We go through conflict before we come to resolution and peace. Sometimes you have to fight your spouse, not physical fight, inshallah. We usually know who will win that contest. But sometimes you have to struggle with your spouse in order to attain that peace within the home. Sometimes you find you are both working towards it. But attaining this tranquility, this peace, requires us to give as much as we expect. Marriage is like cooking a pot of soup. Or what? Laksa? Laksa, yes. You have some ingredients that make laksa laksa. If the ingredients are not there, it's not laksa. You can put labels on the pot and say it's laksa. You can swear, Billahi ladhi, this is laksa. It's not laksa. So marriage is the same way. There are some things you've just got to put it inside to make marriage marriage. So if you want peace, you've got to put the right stuff in it. One way of trying to get peace within the marriage is that understanding. Understanding gender differences, personality differences. We sometimes ignore that. Understanding also that everybody has a story. You know how when a great movie is made and people have seen the movie and they love the movie, then they will release the making of such and such a movie, and then people go and buy the DVD. They want to see the making of the movie that they liked. In our lives, we also have our own stories and the making of our stories. One way of getting peace is to understand the making of your spouse. Where are they coming from? What have they experienced? What have they seen? Because sometimes in all the excitement and the pleasure of wanting to get married, that's one issue that doesn't get addressed. Sometimes we don't even know it's there. Sometimes the person we are getting married to doesn't know how much their backstory, the making of their story, is affecting and influencing them currently in that relationship, in the courtship, and in the marriage itself. So we sometimes see certain things and we think, why is this person acting this way? Why can't this person be X, Y, Z? The answer lies in understanding their story. But we'll talk more. Understanding is a whole different section in the course of today's presentation, inshallah. Another thing to understand also is expectations. That we often have very different expectations of how a marriage should be handled. The same way when you are sitting in a car and you are driving with another person who's also an experienced driver, that other person usually has expectations about how you should drive, when you should slow down, whether you should have allowed that man in that car cut you off or not, whether you shouldn't have. What should you do? Should you take this route or that route? Even when the little gadget Waze is telling you in 300 meters, turn right. So we have to start from this level of understanding. Then what someone described as to see another person. It's a way of talking about being compassionate. To actually want to know who this person is after stripping away your expectations of who the person should be. What are this person's fears, their concerns, their biggest goals, their biggest dreams? For those of us who are seated in this room who are married, just think about it for a second. Do you know your spouse's greatest concern? Do you know? Have you ever discussed it? Has it ever come up even? Do you know your spouse's biggest goals? What are their fears? The things that make them most afraid? I'm wondering, do I know? I don't know. Some, you find, yes, I know. Some is like, I don't think I do. Because sometimes we are just so used to this person. We see them every day. We feel we know them. But sometimes we don't know everything. So trying to see the person and know who this person really is helps to bring tranquility and peace. What else brings tranquility is knowing how to quarrel. Knowing how to quarrel. I usually say, please quarrel. Please quarrel. Just quarrel in a way that makes sure at the end of the quarrel, your marriage is still standing, your spouse still feels complete, no part of your spouse's person or psyche has been beaten off and chewed up and spat out. Just know how to do it, and we'll talk about the hows. Now, from the same verse, another word that stands out, or two words, they go together. Mawaddata, love, warahma, and mercy. I like the fact that the two words were paired together, that one immediately followed the other one. Because usually love is very strong. Love is linked to passion, absolute devotion, especially in the early stages of marriage and during courtship, where everything you see looks like your spouse. Every sound is like your spouse's voice or footsteps. Oh, yes, I know. That's where usually we start to lose ourselves. Literally lose ourselves. Anything your spouse-to-be likes, you like. Anything your new bride or new husband wants, you want. Someone says, so what will you be doing tomorrow? I don't know. I'll find out what so-and-so wants to do first. Shall we go out? You know, we usually go out together to do X, Y, Z on Thursdays. Sorry, not today. Because you have other plans. So love usually is so strong that we always feel love is plenty. Love makes the world go round. Love is enough. Love conquers everything. We have these sayings about love. The reality, from the side of those who are married and those who have observed and witnessed marriages, is love is never enough. Love never conquers all. Love is sometimes conquered by other things. And sometimes the world stops going round, even with all the love in it. That's why I love the fact that mercy is put right next to it. Because I feel, I could be wrong, that where love cannot fill the gap, mercy fills the gap. Until love recovers from whatever has been bashing it and starts to make the world spin again. Because sometimes there's what you might call interference. When you place a call to somebody, there's interference and the line isn't clear, it doesn't even go through. At times you have interference with love. Coming sometimes from conflict. You see, we keep talking about conflict. Your spouse has said or done something to deeply offend or hurt you. You are thinking to yourself in great indignation, how could she do that? She specifically knows how much I hate that, and she did it. At that moment, you usually don't feel much love for your spouse. If before the spouse committed that atrocity, your love gauge was reading 100%, as you are thinking about the horribilities she did or he did, it just comes dropping down till it's about 50%. And by 50%, you are not as generous as you would be. You are not at your best towards your spouse. Sometimes that's when people start thinking of ways of getting back or getting even, or saying that gift I was planning to buy, I'm not buying it anymore. Not until we resolve this. But it's at times like that that mercy has to step in. Compassion, kindness. It is that sense of compassion that helps us forgive. It's the sense of compassion that allows us to slow down long enough to say, let me hear what he has to say for himself. Let me hear how he can explain what he's done. That sometimes allows us to even overlook, even when the person has refused to apologize. But because we have a bigger goal, like greater commitments to the marriage, like a willingness to give the marriage a chance to survive, then we let mercy come in and fill the gap. And we'll come back again to mercy and conflict and how the two go very well together. So when we look at Surah Rum, this is the understanding I get about where the marriage should start from. We may not always be able to maintain this spirit of friendship and kindness and willingness to give peace, to strive for peace, but it's a good starting point. And usually if the husband and the wife share the same idea about how the marriage should start, it helps tremendously. Because in the middle of an argument, you will either one of you or both of you will remember where you started from and try and get back to this point, at least, inshallah.
Additional, excuse me. The more your love for Allah, the more your consciousness of Allah, the more compassionate you are to people, the more ready you are to be forgiving again and again. And so, as Sister Salatu was saying, even if the love or euphoria of love is to decrease, the link you have with Allah prevents your mercy from decreasing. It prevents you from going to a level of injustice. Why? Because the angel on your left starts to get busy. What I mean is, so long as your relationship with Allah is strong, you will not do anything that's a sin. And you will not allow other people's behavior towards you to make you move off the straight path. And this is why this question of your relationship with Allah is critical to you being stable. You become predictable, that whatever happens, you're not going to commit a sin. You're not going to start lying. You're not going to be deceptive. You're not going to be cruel. And you will do your best to forgive. Why? Because that is what your love for Allah demands of you. There was a Chinese saying that I liked on this issue of you have to invest in a relationship that is important. It doesn't just happen naturally. As we will come to later, there are some hormones, vasopressin, oxytocin, that create this sense of high in early marriage, which when it goes down, if there isn't enough trust, respect, appreciation, then when it goes down, you start finding there's actually nothing in the marriage. On the question or on the issue of what you mean by marriage and a home, you're trying to have a place where you can be you, no pretending, where if you feel like crying, you don't have to ask yourself why you shouldn't cry in the presence of this person, where the word shame doesn't appear. This is a person you feel completely free to be what you feel like being. If you have a complaint, you raise it. Where you do not feel your vulnerability is something that should not be shown. If I'm in the presence of even some of my friends, there's how I behave. There's the idea of appropriateness. You can't go dressed like this. You can't. Why? Because they would think this way of you. Home is where, so long as it's not bad, if you feel sad, let your sadness be known. And unfortunately, some of us feel that the way to show I'm a strong person, I'm a strong man, is I won't cry, for example. Not knowing that not crying doesn't allow you to connect with others at a deeper level. The fact that you are ready to cry in the presence of this person is communicating something. The fact that you are ready to cry in the presence of this person and give them the permission to come in and help you, not to pretend there's nothing. That pretense is like wearing a mask. The other person doesn't really get to know you. So, home and the kind of spouse you are getting married to is not just like a friend, but somebody deeper. So, key thing is, this is a relationship where you have to cut down on pretending. Need to cut down on the pretending to be your real you, and let the person get to know that you trust them enough to be who you really are. Otherwise, you don't really know each other. You know the actors because you're just acting, and the person knows the actor and the actress, but not the person without the mask. So marriage is where you want to remove the mask. Let the person know who you really are. Otherwise, who you really are, you never find a home. You always find you have to be acting in the front, in the presence of everybody. And it doesn't give you peace of conscience because you're not really free. The verse of the Quran, where Allah is talking about how He has created you male and female, nations and tribes. Lita'arafu. Lita'arafu in Arabic means to know each other, not one to know the other. Yeah. It's ta'aruf. It's mutual knowing. It's for men to understand women better, for women to understand men better. And in that relationship, to have the humility to not go into marriage with stereotypes. I know how women are. My wife is like that. So inshallah, when we come to the question of differences, we'll come back to this in more detail. But just to recognize that Allah has created us with some differences, and it is for us to be proactive enough to learn what is new. In every field of human endeavor, it is those who are able to get out of their boxes into others that are the most creative. Innovation starts actually not from within your field. Most innovations are ideas from other fields that are brought to your own field. You get to have a richer relationship if you are humble enough to be curious. Pocahontas, in the song on Pocahontas, I think towards the ending, something that if you walk in the footsteps of a stranger, you'll know the things you never knew you never knew. Yeah, to learn to... Anyway.
All right, thank you. Most of what he just talked about is tied to this idea of marriage being half of faith. And many times people ask, what does that mean? And here I'm really just sharing thoughts, not a conclusive response, but just thoughts that we have about what does it mean for marriage to be half of faith. And he has touched a lot upon that. Allah saying that He has created us so that we know one another. It's a test of our humility, a test of our willingness to actually slow down and try and give another human being space to grow. Because when we talk about faith, earlier on we mentioned how having faith in Allah is expressed through how we treat others. And there is no greater test than how you treat somebody who it's so easy to take for granted, because the person is practically there every day. Even if the person travels, you know the person is going to come back home. No matter how far they go, even if they go all the way from Malaysia to the other side of the earth, like America, you know, look, you're going to come back here. So it's so easy to assume you'll always be here. I don't have to go out of my way to do anything for you. You'll come back. No matter what, you'll come back. Even if we quarrel and you pick up your car keys and you jump in your car, as men are usually known to do, much to the annoyance of many women. We'll come to gender differences again in a moment. You know he'll come back home. that he has to come back. Back home in my country, there's a saying that in one part of the country, from a particular tribe, the women have a saying that even if a man is having affairs outside, they would usually say I think the lizard must come back home. Like, he can go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants, but I'm his wife, he's coming back home. It's not exactly flattering, but it tells you how we tend to think of our spouses. So it's a great test for us to not take our husbands and wives for granted. Those rights and those responsibilities, rather, that we know our husbands have or our wives have, we usually sometimes take those things for granted. It's your responsibility to do it, so why should I be appreciative? Why should I say thank you? Why should a man would sometimes say, why should I be appreciative and treat her extra special because she's pregnant? Who else is going to carry the baby? I'm not equipped to do it. Or a woman says, why should I be extra nice or extra thankful or show appreciation because he's spending money on me and the family? Who else is meant to do it? It's his responsibility. We sometimes take these things for granted, failing to realize that it's in our little act of thank you, of honoring the person, of treating the person as special, that we express our belief in Allah. In another verse, I can't remember which it was, Allah was making reference to the fact that it's in His name we make claims about rights. I'm paraphrasing it here. But fear that we should fear Him. It's in His name we make these claims about rights. We can't talk about rights of a husband or a wife without having that leg to stand on and say in Sharia. In the Quran, Allah said, His Prophet said. So there's still that thing of a higher purpose. That's why I talked about